Good afternoon. My name is Ali Alsafi. I'm an interventional radiologist at Hammersmith Hospital in London. First of all, I would like to thank the organising committee for asking me to talk to you today about my experience in reviewing for CVIR. This is an overview of my talk today. I will start by talking to you about why you should review for CVIR. Then I'll move on to talk about my take on reviewing a paper and how I do it practically. Then I'll move on to the reviewer interface and template. So why should you review for CVIR? As an interventional radiologist, reviewing allows you to use your experience and expertise in order to ensure a high standard of published papers in CVIR. This clearly benefits the IR community as well as the specialty as a whole. We are all authors and potential authors, so we all appreciate the value of peer review. This gives us feedback to improve our manuscripts. Even if these are not published in CVIR, usually the feedback is good enough to allow you to publish it elsewhere. Clearly, without peer review, there is no scientific publishing and there is no scrutiny of research. Reviewing also gives you an insight into the reviewer's mindset and hopefully allows you to write better papers yourself. As a reviewer, you will get to read the latest research and development in IR before they are widely available, which is a great bonus. And from a practical perspective, you do get CME or CPD points for every paper that you review. More importantly, reviewing is great fun. You get to learn new things, you get to learn new ways of doing things, and it can also invigorate your enthusiasm to conduct your own research. So practically, what do I do when I receive an email invitation to review a paper? First, I assess if I have the time to review in a timely manner. If not, then I decline. If I do have the time, then I move on to reading the title and abstract. If I feel that I have a good grasp of the subject, then I accept and I move on to review it. If I feel that I have some understanding of the subject, but I am not an expert, then I accept, but expect to do a little bit of reading during the review process. If I am completely new to the subject, then I either decline or be prepared to do more extensive reading and accept a review. It is these unfamiliar topics that can be most interesting and challenging, and the topic may be so novel that no one actually has much experience with it, so you're not alone. If, on the other hand, you're regularly getting invited to review papers that you're not comfortable with, then you should really review your profile in Editorial Manager and edit your areas of expertise and interest. Next, we will discuss what is required of you as a reviewer. So peer reviewing essentially aims to give detailed assessments of the quality of a paper and provide recommendations to the editor in order to help with the final decision. The final decision clearly rests with the editor, but it takes into account the opinions of at least 2 reviewers. Things to comment on include the quality of the English. Clearly, your role here is not to proofread the paper. This is done separately later on, but it is important to make some kind of comment on the quality of the English and whether it needs improving or not. Other things to think about are whether the article is relevant to CVIR. This is often already done by the editor, but your comments may also be helpful here. You should look at the content of each section and assess if the content is appropriate. For example, are all the results in the results section, or are some results actually only included elsewhere? Are all the methods in the methods section, or again, are some bits of the method omitted and they appear elsewhere? You should also assess the paper for any fundamental errors and flaws. You should look at the calculations for any obvious miscalculations and any errors in the percentages. Throughout reading the manuscript, you should be thinking of ways that the author can improve their manuscript. And also you need to be thinking about whether the paper adds to the current knowledge and ultimately whether it is worth publishing. Moving on to practically, how do I go about reviewing? I usually start by having a first quick read of the paper to get a broad overview of the topic. At this point, I try to identify any major flaws. in the method itself, and I'm prepared to look at these in more details during my second read. I then move on to do the second more detailed read, and I open a Word document separately and start to make comments as I go. First, I look at what the main question of the manuscript is and whether it is important and relevant. I look at how well the paper is written. I then move on to the methods and I look at whether these are appropriate to answer the question, and I try to identify sources of bias here. Moving on to the results, I check whether these are clearly laid out and are the statistics appropriate. I also look at the tables and graphs at this stage and assess whether these are complete duplications of the results section. Do they actually add to the manuscript, or are they completely redundant? I move on to the discussion and I look at whether the discussion reflects the results and addresses any issues with them. I also assess whether the discussion reflects the current body of the literature and whether it makes an appropriate reference to it. I particularly look at whether there are any relevant papers that are omitted from the discussion. I then move on to the conclusion and see if this is supported by the results. As I mentioned, I write my comments as I go, and I specify the page number and line number to make it easier for the authors to follow the suggested corrections. At the end, I try to summarize the paper in 2 to 3 sentences, and I particularly comment on the strengths and weaknesses, and I move on to copy these comments into the Editorial Manager. I will briefly go through Editorial Manager and the review interface next. When you log in, you can usually see a drop-down menu. You need to ensure that you select your reviewer profile here in order to see your pending assignments. Once you select your reviewer profile, you can see your pending assignments. You click on these and the next page appears. Here you can download a PDF of the paper that you're planning to review. You can also see how long you've got left before the assignment is due. You can also click on similar articles in PubMed. This feature does not work very well, so if you want to do a search, I suggest you do your own. Once you have reviewed the paper, you can move on to the comment section, so you can submit your recommendations. By this time, you should have already made up your mind about the quality of the paper and your recommendations. Here are the following options. So first, you can accept the paper. This is usually if the paper is clear, relevant, free of scientific and typographical errors, and is ready for publication. This is usually for papers that have already been reviewed once, but some are so outstanding that you may wish to accept outright. You then have minor revisions, which are papers that are nearly there, they just need a few minor changes. Papers that require major revisions can be because of fixable fundamental flaws or a lot of changes that are required to bring them up to scratch. And then finally, you can reject a paper for a variety of reasons. These are some of the reasons to reject a paper. This list is clearly not exhaustive. For example, it can be because of poor methodology with a lot of bias which affects the results. The next section is where you submit your detailed comments to the authors. This bit you've already done or have already done, usually in a Word document, so I just copy and paste it. This section has a template, and the template is in order to allow for an easy assessment. Try to comment on every section, and remember the authors will see this. The next section is your confidential comments to the reviewers. It also has a template. Try to address every section again. And you need to make sure that your comments to the editor do tally with your comments to the author. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'd be very happy to answer these during the breakout session later. I have a few questions myself for the editors.